So you're in the session, Open Educational Resources, also referred to as OERs, which is probably how we'll talk about them mostly in this session. And specifically, I'm going to talk about how you can rethink course content with OERs in mind. I have some really good panelists with me that I'm going to very briefly introduce first here. So first is Michael Carroll, who's a professor of law and directs the Program of Information Justice and Intellectual Property at Washington College of Law, so right here at AU. He's also a founding member of the Creative Commons, which you will get to talk a little bit about, and now works with the Creative Commons United States chapter. Kind of talk about that as well. Has an undergraduate degree from Chicago, University of Chicago, if I got this right, and a law degree from Georgetown Law Center. Did my online research right here. And then Matthew, and you taught me so yeah, I misspelled it many times, who is Vice President of Law and Policy at the Computer and Communication Industry Association. And also teaches at Georgetown Law and also at the Georgetown University Graduate School, which is where I encountered Matthew first by taking his course on intellectual property policy. Then he will get to talk about and got an undergrad degree from Duke and law degree from the University of Virginia. The last one. Yeah, right. So Ralph, I hope I got your credentials right. You have to correct me if I didn't. But professor of economics at here at AU. Also, we're part of writing this book, which is an open source book on economics, macroeconomics specifically. Macro and micro, actually. Okay, great. And received undergraduate from University of Virginia, right. MBA from Duke, right. And then PhD from here. That's right. Perfect. Got them all right. And my name is Lucas, and I work in CTRL, and specifically on one of the big projects is this project, Open Educational Resources, and making sure faculty members get the support they need to really try and start using them in their courses. So I'm very excited to see you all here. I figure we'll start very briefly with the very basic question, what OERs actually are, and we'll start with this basic definition. So OER are teaching, learning, and research coming up the right way. Resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license. And that license then permits people to use these resources or repurpose them sort of to their own liking. And then open educational resources can include full courses, just course materials, modules, textbooks, streaming videos, test software, really anything that can help support access to knowledge. I kind of paraphrase that, I realize as well. And this is what the Hewlett Foundation, I'm a foreigner, so I get that. I'm from Sweden, so sometimes I pronounce things a little funny. And there's really two key things in this definition that I think we should focus on. And the one part is this permit to use part, which is what we would call open access. And then we have the second part, which is repurposing or rewriting or taking material and do something different with it. And that's what we could call open source. So keep those two in mind as we go through this. And I want just to sort of exemplify what this could look like. We have a bunch of different things that you might be using in a course here. So a textbook, say, we have a computer game, an NPR Planet Money, podcasts, some stats software, a bunch of different things. And the question then becomes, what are these things are open access? Because oftentimes we confuse open access with something being electronic or digital, and that's not really the case at all. It can be anything, any format really, that would be allowed for free use or would be called open access, because it's only the content that matters. So if the content is freely licensed, it can be a published book, like this one, right? So the content in this book is free for anyone. So if you buy it, you only buy the printed copy, for example. So that's kind of the difference. You can also download it online, right? And then it will be entirely free, except for the device you have to buy to read it, of course. So that's really the difference, whether the content is freely licensed or not, and not so much in what format it comes in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Perfect. So what we're looking for is this logo, the Creative Commons logo. And this is the one that really stipulates in what way it's freely licensed and in what way you're allowed to use it. But at a minimum, it means that you're allowed to use it, and you're allowed to share it with whoever.
Yes.
Okay, very
I'll
good.
talk about it.
So I'll let him do all of that talking. So also a quick introduction to why we're talking about OERs and why it's important. And here's really why. The price of textbooks have been increasing very steadily. Oops. So point being that now students are expected to pay at least $1,200 a year only in course materials, which is a problem because when we talk to our students here at AU, what we found was that a lot of them actually don't even consider paying for books if they're more than $50, and especially not if it's not their major course. So what they do instead is they borrow it from the library to whoever reserves. You have some limited access to the book, or you buy a book and you share it with friends. Also means that you will have limited access to the book. And some students even report that they actually dropped a course due to the extremely high price of the books, and because they realize that it's not on the reserve, there's not enough people to share with it, so they actually can't afford it. So this is why this is very important, and we'd like to start a conversation and help that you guys start thinking about us as well. Great, so I'll hand it over to Michael Carroll to start off. There we go.
Okay. I just
we can also switch seats, right?
Wait, I want to use these
you want,
as prompts. All right. So I'm going to talk relatively quickly, and there's more slides than we can afford, but it's a leave behind, and it's got some links and stuff in it. And if I've learned, I don't know if you know that you can't read and listen at the same time. That the channel in your brain is talking to. So I'm going to say a few things, and then I'm going to flash some pictures at you. Okay. And why am I not advancing?
Was it not?
There we go. All right. So I'm a copyright lawyer. My incentive here, this is sort of both a service to the community and my research interests is in aligning copyright with its original goals to promote the progress of science and useful arts by encouraging authorship and dissemination of knowledge. So I'm this is at the core of my academic interests. And I get involved in not just sort of talking about these ideas of change, but actually trying to be part of the change. So that explains my activities around Creative Commons. And I think, from my perspective, we have a broken system here. The way that traditional textbooks and other learning materials are produced is a broken system from my perspective, because the incentives for authors to create and disseminate knowledge are grossly distorted by a publishing industry that has now got a series of practices where let's just switch chapters, call it a new edition, and raise prices. And it's having all kinds of distortive effects on students' behaviors. Lucas just reports from our campus, but there's a report that was done on the Florida State campus, and the distorting behaviors that students engage in, because textbook cost is the one piece of their cost of education they can control. So they choose courses based on the cost of the book. They choose not to buy the book and do all of these workarounds that inhibit their educational outcomes. It's economically irrational in light of the cost of the degree at the four-year institution, but it's even worse at the community college level, where the cost of the textbooks can be more than tuition. So it's great that President Obama is saying, let's give access to higher education by making the tuition free. But in fact, it's the textbook costs that have to be addressed as well, and the education department wimped out on doing that. So I'm about changing the system of production so that we have openly licensed books, and hopefully the behaviors of both adopters and producers can change in the same way that we've changed our behavior around, say, recycling, right? How many of us 30 years ago routinely recycled? There was a few pioneers who got up on Saturday mornings and tied up their bundles of newspapers and cans and drove them to some recycling center. Over time, we've institutionalized that behavior. I'm hoping that we're in the process of institutionalizing the production and use of open resources. So this is fast. This is what copyright does. It's automatic. And you get all of these rights automatically. What's the guy in the shower doing? Because it's automatic, if you're taking notes, federal law is showering down upon you all of these exclusive rights. And you're getting about 200 copyrights from around the world through the operation of our trade agreements. So that's closed, right? A resource comes with copyright. Copyright sets the terms of use from a user's perspective, and if you want to do any of those things with a copyrighted resource, you either need permission given by the law, like it's a fair use, or else you need a license. And that's why teachers and students can't freely reproduce these books without some license or permission, and that's where Creative Commons is going to come in. We don't need this. So Creative Commons is a way of saying, copyright says all rights reserved, go get permission. Creative Commons is a way for the copyright owner to say, actually, I hereby give you permission. It's a way of giving permission to everybody up front in a way that ideally they can understand relatively quickly. One institutional note, as Lucas mentioned, so CC is a nonprofit organization based in California. I'm on that board of directors, but it has affiliate organizations around the world. And those folks around the world said, well, where's the US affiliate? So we decided we'd go ahead and create that. So we created Creative Commons United States, which is a project actually housed here at the university down in the law school in my IP center. So I'm both on the mothership and in the local organization. But if you have students who are interested in this stuff, please let us know. We're looking at ways to engage with the larger campus and take advantage of the fact that we have CCUS at American University. So open Creative Commons decided to create 6 different packages of permissions, basically trying to estimate what users and producers would be willing to do. So you choose what conditions you want to retain. So you can do anything what you want with my material as long as you do one of these things. So the most open says attribution, just give me credit. Do anything you want, just give me credit. Or share alike says, do anything you want as long as if you produce some derivative work, you use this same license. It's like open source software. We want you to feed the commons. Non-commercial is self-explanatory. No derivatives is don't. You can copy paste, but you cannot actually adapt it without my permission. When you put those together, you get these 6 permutations of licenses. So there's not actually a single Creative Commons license. There are 6, and you can choose from this menu. And people who create open educational resources have actually chosen all 6 of these in different. But the levels of open, within the movement, there is a move away from the more restrictive ones towards the CC BY, which is do anything you want with this as long as you give me credit. And that is the license that applies to the content in these books. So, Ralph and his team gave you this content. They have also given you, or OpenStax has given you a license. You can download the Word version of this text, and you can completely rewrite any of that text as long as you point back to the source and give them credit and say, I started with this and I've now changed the following 5 chapters. You can also give up your copyright under the CC0 or label something that's in the public domain as such. And we try to explain to the user what the license is doing. So there's a deed that says, in simple what we call human readable terms, this is what you're allowed to do with this. But it's not the license. The license is actually a lawyer readable document that sits behind it that looks like that. And on the web, there are about 800 million CC licensed objects, everything from MIT OpenCourseware. At Rice University, there's if you don't know about this, Connections is a repository full of modules of learning resources that are all CC BY licensed and are quite useful. Public Library of Science and Wikipedia. Wikipedia uses the attribution share alike. So give Wikipedia credit, and if you adapt it, you have to license under the same terms. Flickr's got about 300 or 400 million photos under CC license. So if you want photos for presentations and things, they're there for the taking. YouTube's got about 8 million videos, I think, and 9 Inch Nails released an album under the CC license, so that's fine. All right. So the problem, as Lucas had said, is textbook costs are soaring. Interestingly, though, the students aren't paying more. So what does that tell you, right? Is that they've changed their behavior. They're not buying the books. So instead, and comes from an NPR story that pulls these together, what they're doing is a mix of satisficing and not buying. And that's distorting the educational outcomes. There's good data to show that if you don't start the course with the book, and you don't have a copy that you can keep and mark up and use, your educational outcomes are going to be worse. So that is part of what open educational resources are about. Let's solve that problem. Let's fix that. So where do you find these things? OER Commons is one portal into a lot of the supplementary materials, and here I'm just going to flash some resources at you just to show this is a real thing. There's already a large pool of resources that you can draw from. With respect to textbooks, there is the college open textbooks is probably the primary source, but there's an open textbook library at the University of Minnesota that's got a series of books. And this is a student-driven sort of resource. Wikibooks. OpenStax is probably the best publisher at this point, and their goal is to create books for the 25 highest enrollment courses where you can get the biggest bang for the buck, and then they'll move on to others. And you can see, here you go, right? So this is one of the most popular, and this has been adapted now. There are multiple versions of this as statistic professors around the country have localized and sort of updated their own versions of this. Boundless is also another publisher, so a couple of other things in the system that are of interest. So are these things any good? Now you're giving it to me for free, are they any good? Well, Ralph's here, so we know this is good. But that's a concern, and so, for instance, with math, the American Institutes of Mathematics wanted to actually kind of certify the quality of some of the open math textbooks. So they've gone through as a scholarly society and picked out, as you can see, approved textbooks to show we vetted these. And actually, one of the things, if you want to get involved and you don't want to write a book, part of what they're trying to do at Minnesota is get you to review a book so that you can help promote because the argument for open educational resources is these are better, not just cheaper, but they're better. And they're better in part because they can be updated and we can get the mass of authors to give us the best and let the cream rise. So part of that can be the review process. So I'd encourage you to think about doing that even if you're not in the position to adopt right now. All right, I'm going to finish up. Oh, but there's one other story. This story, I think, is a really powerful story, and this is about community college, but I would love to see AU become the first 4-year college. So after one of these OER presentations, the chief academic officer in Tidewater, which is down in Norfolk, Virginia, heard the presenter say, there are enough good open textbooks out there that you could create an entire degree program with just open textbooks. And he said, really? Took the idea back to a faculty champion, and they created a 21-course, 2-year associate's degree in business administration. All the books are free. Shaves 30% off the cost of that degree. What does that mean? If you put that money in the students' pockets, it means a returning Iraq vet who takes pre-calc and says, this is the first time I've ever started a course with the book because I was always waiting for my student loans to clear. It's a 40-year-old single mother who had told her 13-year-old daughter, I can't buy you braces, I gotta pay for college, who suddenly can buy her kid braces. So the face of consumer surplus is real, and that's just 2 examples. But we have a bunch of students who are on student loans who are engaged in the same kinds of distortive behaviors, and if you could put that money in their pockets. So wouldn't it be cool if some department at AU decided to create the first 4-year open degree and leave it out there as an opportunity and a challenge? There are a bunch of open courses, so it's not just textbooks, it's all kinds of course materials. We could talk about MOOCs and Q&A, and I think I am done.
Shut up. It's great. Yeah, so we'll save any questions for a little later, and then we'll rapidly move on.
I don't need to move, do I?
You do not need to move. You can stay put. You want water?
No, I'm all right. Just getting over a cold. So excuse me. So going after Professor Carroll on this subject is a daunting task. My purpose here is really not to be so much sort of prescriptive, but kind of descriptive. And what I sort of want to describe is my own experience as an educator, part-time, coming to this, looking to sort of have my own, admittedly very low-cost, open curriculum, in part because as a law student, I was mostly paying for my law texts out of my own pocket. It was student loans and working on the side. I thought the prices were extortionate. You never got any value for the money. Textbooks date quickly, and so when I started teaching myself as an adjunct, I was like, I'm starting all digital. I want to have a pay-per-view class, and that sort of necessarily drove me towards using open resources. And when I say open, at least for my purposes, I'm talking about open along the lines of two dimensions, which I think aligns very well with sort of open access and open educational resources, but it's not totally symmetrical. It's sort of technologically or architecturally open, as in they can be accessed by anyone. And generally speaking, that means available online free and not behind a paywall. And then that also means legally open, as in either public domain in the copyright sense, right? There is no copyright on the work. Or openly licensed with a permissive license, which usually means something like Creative Commons. So I want to talk about that in the sort of the context of the academic platform, and also the content you're using, and I'll sort of talk about my experience with that in my own class. So as I mentioned, I'm an adjunct. I actually during the day do mostly intellectual property law for internet and technology companies with an association here in DC, and then I just sort of, I'm on the main campus in the law school at night. And so, I don't really purport to have a lot of wisdom when it comes to pedagogy. I was really, I'm sort of trying to translate my personal experience and personal knowledge that I learned in practice into the classroom. And in my day job, right, yes, we have lots of textbooks. I have a shelf of textbooks, but all the resources we work with are online. And I find all the young people that I work with are also much more accustomed to online resources. And so that makes a lot of sense to be putting your content online in a platform that is accessible to students. And at least for me, that meant initially a few options. One, at Georgetown, we're very much wedded to the Blackboard platform, and so I did. Are there any Blackboard users here? All right, so
this is a Blackboard thing.
Yeah, oh, is it? Okay. All right. So you guys probably know I was not a big fan of Blackboard, in part because it's not well, it used to be really clunky, and I think recently they've sort of spiffed up the platform a little bit, but. It's also not an open platform in the sense that when your content is in there, it's not freely, it's difficult to extricate stuff from Blackboard if you want to move it somewhere else, and you may wind up sort of reinventing the wheel because content is not easily extracted. And so, if you're sort of inside that walled garden, that's sort of a problem. And we have the same issue in the law school, where Georgetown Law uses Westlaw, and Westlaw has some pretty cool tools bolted onto the pay databases called the Westlaw Education Network, which allows for really interesting interlocking of your syllabi into the content in the paywall database. But again, if you want to take content out, whether it's course modules or the stuff in their database, once you want to move that somewhere else, you sort of lost access to that content. And so I've ultimately moved out of both of those platforms, working on the main campus in just a simple Georgetown-hosted WordPress platform, which uses very simple HTML, which is freely, none of this sort of proprietary content management system stuff where you can't necessarily port your content elsewhere. And actually in the law school, sort of moved between using the Westlaw system, which is this walled garden, and a simple Google site. Again, because the content was sort of locked up inside that environment. And so that's a long way of sort of saying the openness of the platform on which you're hosting course materials, assuming you're hosting them electronically, is as important as the terms of the materials itself, because if you can't get that out, if your students can't get that out for reuse or remix or repurposing, then you're sort of failing on a number of variables of openness. So that's just a word on content, and let me speak a little bit about, on platforms. Let me speak a little bit about content. As I said, I didn't like textbooks, and so I was resolved to do all digital. The result is in the law, it's sort of easy to have an all primary materials syllabus. That's generally how we teach, with case studies and primary materials. And of course, most U.S. government works are in the public domain. The United States government doesn't take copyright in its own work, so it's sort of easier for a law professor to do this. And there's also open access law journals that are not necessarily public domain, but freely licensed, and so it makes it easier to build a syllabus that way. In other, and sort of the hard sciences, there are, I know, a number of open access journals as well. And so, I can't speak from experience, but I do know that it's possible to build syllabi and course materials out of those resources. But that being said, I do sort of try and evangelize the content being open. I frequently say to professors, I'd very much like to assign your article, but it's, I can't link to it, right? And if I can't link to it, that's not sort of accessible for the purposes that I need. And I do try and persuade people to make content available online, which often means I'm linking to professors' websites where they've uploaded a pre-publication version of their article, because the published version is behind a paywall that I can't access. But if my students can access that article without, say, typesetting and page layout, and not have to pay $50 for a textbook, I think that's a good trade-off to make. So that's another point, is I actually, much of my syllabus links to other content, which is to say I'm not directly hosting content. And from a copyright standpoint, that gives you a lot of flexibility in the sense that you may, even if the content is online, it may not necessarily be licensed, but insofar as you're not directly hosting that, you have, I think legally speaking, less exposure for pointing to content that may not be properly licensed. So now that's not to say you should run around pointing to infringing content, but if there's a professor who's uploaded their own paper to SSRN, the Social Science Research Network, or it's on their own webpage, that may or may not be on symmetrical with the terms of the entity that finally published that paper. But if you're simply linking to it on their website, that sort of solves some of the problems that you'd have to go through with clearances. And that is not an ideal solution, but again, faced with the choice of asking students to pay for a very expensive compilation of works for a textbook, I think that's a decent compromise. So there are a number of the resources that Michael pointed to that I think are a good basis for doing that. But at least in my experience, trying to build a digital syllabus online from public domain or openly licensed resources was not an entirely difficult task. And I know I've had a number of students who've said, that they were happy to find that I didn't have a textbook in my class, and that's, I think, a very relevant consideration. So it's a long way of saying, for purposes of building a syllabus, looking for materials hosted online that are either public domain or under CC licensed materials, I think should be, it can be done, and it should be something to think about when building a syllabus for any class.
So the question, I agree, but I often use the course reserves people at the library for this. I have maybe an old article that's no longer in print or an old textbook, and they'll go ahead and scan it and put it in. Are you not really in favor of doing that anymore? Is that?
Well,
now kind of old-fashioned to do it that
No,
way?
yeah. So in my personal experience, I like to have electronic versions, in part because, and maybe this is just an artifact of legally oriented course materials, but we often parse language very closely, and so if a student has a question about a paragraph, for me it's very important to be able to, when so-and-so said X, Y, and Z, to be able to put that up on the screen, find the particular text, and I find it's just a lot easier to be doing that electronically. Now, if your course reserve is an electronic course reserve, that may work. I know, and I'm not up to speed on this, I know a lot of institutions have been having legal fights with publishers about the terms and nature of their online course reserves. So, it's for me, I've found it easier to look for materials that are that I don't have to put in reserves, but that are already available online. Now, if I were to come across an article that I very much wanted to, that I can't point to, then I think yes, that would be sort of my fallback position. But for me, having the
digital, it would still be available digitally, and I can still take a textbook over to the library, and depending on how much of it I want to have them scan and scan in, I can still make it available to my students, because I always assume that they're dealing with the copyright at that end, right? I mean, that's the way they present it to me, that.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how the course reserves are done. Now, it's.
Well, once they scan it in and they've created in effect a PDF of it, then it's accessible to every student.
Now, it may be that it may be that the course reserves folks are paying a CCC license on the back, right? So that is actually being licensed by them. And insofar as your institution is willing to do that and not pass the costs on to your students, I think that's a reasonable accommodation. Not an accommodation. That's a great outcome, because you're getting the digital material and your students don't have to pay for it. In some other institutions, the course reserves the cost of the course reserve may be passed on to the student as in order to get access. And I just don't know how that's handled from
And
school
there's
to
always
school.
free use for educational purposes.
Right.
Some libraries go with that too.
Yeah, that's true. And I know, there are some libraries that are very aggressive, and there are other libraries that are very conservative about this. And so your own institution might have sort of different views about how far fair use goes. If you were to, we do know that I think creating course packs and making them available persistently is not going to constitute fair use. If you're doing something sort of on the fly, I think we know that it is, right? So I have no qualms about finding an article and printing that out, saying, hey, this would be great for next week's class, and I bring in a bunch of copies for class. If that's going to become a part of my syllabus every year, and I don't think, some institutions may start to think that that's not fair use. And there's some amount of legal exposure there, and so if your institution can then make that available as an online reserve, and they pay CCC as the collecting society that sort of gathers the money and pays out to rights holders on the back end, that's another way that institutions have handled this. But at least when I was an undergrad, our course pack material costs got passed on to us, and I remember course packs were some of the most expensive things I had to pay for.
Well, that's why I don't use it as a course pack. I mean, I'm pleading ignorance to whatever AU's policy is, thinking that's their gift to me, is they say, come over to the library and tell us what you need on course reserves. I'm just asking if legally I shouldn't be doing that, or
No, I think
that's an old school thing.
Well, so legally, I think if your institution is doing it, that's been clear. Yeah. My own purpose of wanting, whether the technology, having it sort of all online is old school or new school. I think people are going to differ as to how they want to do it. For me, my view has always been trying to minimize the cost that my students are paying for educational resources.
Yeah. You mentioned a pre-approved or pre-published, article, and as opposed to having to pay for it after it's been published. And what's the legality?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question, and I've often wondered about this. generally, what I see a lot of faculty doing is that they'll have sort of comment drafts, at least now again, this is mostly for a lot of publications where you don't have an extensive peer review process, which we see a lot of them. Law review articles, for example, are often, many are published with only student peer review. There's others that are published with more aggressive faculty peer review. But content will be, so that folks will put stuff on their websites, for a sort of a personal website or SSRN, and the publisher may have a legal argument that copy is infringing of the copy that's in their journal.
But a lot of the publishers have, as part of the publication agreement, authors okay to put up the pre-publication, and almost always the pre-reviewed copy can be put up online. But even the post-reviewed manuscript that you submitted for final formatting can often be put up 6 months after publication or something like that.
So the author themselves usually has a non-exclusive license to use their own work. So, for example, I write an article, I sell it to the Journal of Law and Technology, and it gets published there. They print it in a journal, but then I also have the right to put that on my website. And I think most scholars, particularly in law, will do that. If not most, many, so as to ensure that their peers can find their work. And for people who don't have access to the paid databases, that's a very valuable resource. My students generally don't, and so I will, particularly in the grad school at least, so I will try and point to those in lieu of pointing to something that's behind a paywall, because that means they can access it at no cost.
And that's the case even if you assign away the copyright to the journal?
Well, it depends on
It's the terms of that agreement. So you sign away, but through the open access movement that I've been working on, but many of the publishers have as part of the terms and conditions, we're taking the copyright, but we're giving you, the author, the permission to put this version up online.
Or distribute to your
Yeah,
students.
and it's usually, then they get into little, you can put it on your personal website and cannot put it in my institutional repository, and slice and dice the rights in different ways.
But how do you as a user know, is there some designation or something, so that if you wanted to use something like that in a course,
Well, this is where I think Matt's saying, and I agree, it's like, if you're pointing, basically the liability sits with whoever's put it up online.
Okay.
Nobody's ever going to come after you, the innocent downloader. So if you're pointing students to an online resource,
so if it's on your syllabus and so forth, then
don't worry about the law. You're not getting your students in legal trouble
Yeah,
for pointing to it.
Right. Yeah. I don't. So what might happen is Michael Regner. We should take questions.
Yeah, we can switch over about now.
Yeah, I don't have much. I don't have a whole long thing to talk about. To give you a little experience of how I got involved with this. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I should.
Yeah. Just too much time. So I just got a blind email, I guess, in the summer of 2013, and would you like to work and pay a small stipend to review, edit an open source textbook? I had no idea what an open source textbook or anything like that, who OpenStats is, and any of this, and through email I just started getting chapters sent to me. They've already been written. Taylor had already written them, and I went through and tried to clean them up a little bit in terms of they're just a little verbose, and add problems, add review problems, add analytical problems, add sort of sum it up, add little modules that they said that they needed, and then kind of go through a whole production phase. In the summer it was fine. During the fall it got a little kind of touchy, working under their constraints. And that was really, my role, and it was working in a team of 2 or 3 with a production manager and one other editor, and I went through, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 chapters. I will say, I thought the chapters were quite good, and certainly of comparable. Were they better? It's a principles textbook. Were they better? I thought they were good. And some better, some maybe not. And it's hard for me to weigh in on the others because I didn't really read them. This happened to be a combined micro-macro text. It looks like just from the size of that, they've now cut it down to micro versus macro.
There's actually one macro and one micro, and then there's principle of economics, which has both of them.
Right. So I was on the both of them, but it looks like they've also parsed it down to macro versus micro, and I guess somehow my name got involved, which is okay. So, and that's essentially where it was left. And an interesting thing is, so I thought I want to adopt it. I haven't yet. I wanted to wait until I've seen the finished product. I've also been struggling with switching costs. So that has nothing to do with whether it's open or through some other textbook. But I think Mike makes a great point about sort of the culture of whether I use, going back to that recycling analogy, whether I use my current textbook, which while I'm pretty darn bored with it, all my notes are set up for the rigmarole, all my problems, everything. I can walk in and everything. Thinking about another textbook, which is probably the similar cost, or this, which is no cost to the students, but now I've got to redo all my notes and everything, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. Where do I get it? How do I link them to get it? I don't know. Even though I worked on this, I don't know all the resources. I don't know how. I call the text, the AU textbook. That's not going to work. So there's just a how to go do things that is perhaps missing, and there might be a tipping point that you have to get to where it becomes more mainstream. And if you can get to that tipping point, plus going back to the economics of it, while I should have concern, and it's an interesting point that maybe people aren't going to take your course if they have to pay a lot for textbooks, and I do get concerned about what they're paying, but then I always kind of feel like there's a sort of an acceptable amount and then what's well above, and so I always try to keep it to the acceptable amount, but when it comes to can you make it free? Yeah, I guess I could have, but going back to switching costs, I just didn't go and invest in making switching yet. So the economics of it are quite interesting and one worth exploring. But I guess, or to conclude, from what I saw, I thought it was every bit as good as what I now assign. I have not been. Every little detail is important, so I either use these online homeworks, and I've got them all set up. I have not looked at the online homeworks. I go with this, they assure me that they're the same, but until I would go research that, I probably wouldn't switch. So there's a number of barriers, even though I was involved in running this, that I would have to go through in order to switch. That's all I'm saying.
I think that speaking to that point, that's part of, if you all picked up the folder, you saw there's a little white sheet in there informing you about the new grant program we have that are supposed to help with that particular switch, right? And it's working with me, who's been, I've been going through databases and finding resources in I'd say every discipline to figure out obviously what's out there for people. I can't read it and say what's good or not because I don't know all disciplines, but I can definitely tell you where to look and where to find them, and then we together figure out where to start, right? It's always hard when you just put in something to Google and hope that something perfect will pop up. It rarely does, so I'm going to be that process basically to refine and distill. Maybe we should look at just these resources.
Lucas, on that point, I think it was you, Mike, had updated the American Institute of Mathematics had gone through and certified certain things. Is there a procedure to do the same for other disciplines? For example, there's an American Institute of Biological Sciences, AOBS, and to get this sort of thing done so that you know that when you go to these sites, some respected scientists have actually looked at them and saved somebody like you or me having to do that.
Yeah, so we're in early days on this. I mean, I think what OpenStax is trying to do is let its brand stand for that. So it has a top-notch editorial board that helped recruit you to mimic, the Pearson McGraw-Hill process in terms of quality control. But I was using the Mathematics Society as a possible substitute. Maybe we don't need the publisher to do the quality control. And so that's where the Minnesota project, which is trying to invite peer review essentially, so that we can get an open online peer review. So you can ideally get a book and then see the reviews, and so we start to get a Yelp score for each book. So it's early days though, but if you're part of a scholarly society and want to introduce the idea, please. I mean, I think it's a great idea. That's part of the idea that an open resources in an open environment is that we can layer on open review so that the cream really does rise. And if there's really, this is a great book, except it has one critical flaw, it's an open book. Somebody can go in and fix it and say, okay, now I fixed it, and here's the version with the fix.
There was an extensive review of many different comments, iterations of comments going back and forth. Only a few, I wasn't involved with all of them. And then secondly, what I saw, everything we were doing was principles. So I'm not sure at the higher level, more advanced, at least in OpenStax, that they have a lot of textbooks. I don't know.
They're aiming at the 100 level
Right,
courses
that's
right
my
now.
sense, yeah.
Which is the easiest thing to aim at, because if it's principles, they're not changing as rapidly as the forefront of a particular field,
Right.
where your book's out of date in 12 months or 6 months or whatever.
And it's in those instances, I think, that what Matthew was talking about becomes really interesting, right? If you compose an online syllabus with mostly online resources, it's very easy to update those. And especially the course that I took with Matthew, which was on intellectual property policy, was perfect for that, because there was a court decision that came out that particular during the course of that semester that you could throw in there right there, and then let's talk about that next week, right? So you could really, the format really made it possible to keep that incredibly current, which a lot of those higher level courses demand. So yeah, and speaking to what Matthew was saying as well, tying in that to what's going on at AU, and what we discovered in our focus groups is that some of the students that we talked about was saying that the type of material that they enjoyed the most and that they found the most valuable were the ones that they obtained, however, if it was purchased or if it was a PDF or whatever, but that they could bring with them and that they could actually use in other courses later on in their academic career. And that's also an institutional goal we have at AU. We want to have like fosters interdisciplinarity and whatnot. So using materials that you actually use in your freshman year or second year, in when you're starting making connection in your third or fourth year, and going back and finding that. And that's another really good benefit of having an open and online version of everything, that these materials are with the students forever, right? They don't resell it to the bookstore, they don't rent it from the bookstore, give it back. So they actually always have access to it, so they can start making those connections in a very valuable way. And that's something that I noticed with Matthew's course as well, that I wrote derivatives of the work I did there. I could use it later on and get published, etc., which was very useful because I had all of those resources. Still do. Very useful. And also, as Matthew was saying, was that he used a WordPress site to host his syllabus. We have that as well, and we support that at CTRL. So we can, when we engage with you in a project within the grant program, it's a full package deal. So we help you with everything, which is the fun part.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I can't code at all, right? I mean, it's all just sort of basically text markup, just like you do in a Word document. WordPress translates things into HTML4. So that shouldn't be an issue. And the to be clear, the sort of accommodation that I'm talking about, trying to use free or openly licensed content, is not sort of antithetical to using sort of open sort of textbooks developed this way. Certainly you can weave the two together. And it would be, if there were textbooks like this on the legal subjects I was writing about, it would be entirely possible that I could excerpt a subject or a chapter and upload that to my website and say, and read this chapter from this book. So.
But that's the thing I find about a lot of textbooks. I like, and I don't know math, so I'm not saying anything against the math textbook, but many of the textbooks in communication that Andrew and I teach and in journalism, not only are they out of date quickly, but I really only like chapters 3 through 5.
Yeah.
So I don't need the whole book, and the students don't even enjoy the whole book.
Right.
They enjoy specific things. So it's better for me to find pieces from different books, scholarly articles, and then current situations, a current court case, a current New Yorker article, or what have you. So.
May I ask, do you teach the Understanding Media course?
I've taught that class, but I don't teach it routinely.
But we were talking about, very tentatively, about maybe putting together an open book for that course.
That would be a good one.
I think that would be really cool.
It's the ethics of what the publishing, I just wanna make sure I'm not misrepresenting anything based on what I heard, but the need for this all started because textbooks were getting more and more expensive, and they were changing maybe one chapter from one year to the next, and students couldn't use used books more easily. Is that what led to all this?
So, sitting between the Creative Commons guy and the economist, maybe my answer would be, yeah, that it turns out the demand elasticity for textbooks is pretty steep, meaning that, you can jack up the price, and for at least a lot of the students, that cost is getting passed on to, maybe parents. For some students, it's not, and in some environments, it's not, right? And so there are students who simply, they sort of fall out of the marketplace. But yeah, I think that's generally what's happening, and in fact, the returns in the publishing industry, per dollar are much higher than the margins you see in like consumer electronics, for example.
Yeah, it's coming from two different places. There's the cost and the quality arguments, right? So on the cost argument certainly is, this is foundation funded. So the Arnold Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, these are people who are looking at both improving educational outcomes but also educational access. So textbook prices being a serious access issue, it's especially in those disciplines where the knowledge doesn't change, and the publisher's now got a book where the used copy is just as good. How do I make a profit? I need to make my quarterly numbers, so I switch chapters 5 and 6 and call it a new edition, and the teacher's syllabus has page numbers in it. So now a student has to spend time figuring that out, and so that's the most egregious version of an update. There are other updates where it's questionable whether
change the graphs to get 2014 in it.
Right.
Yeah, and sort of minor updates might every year you sort of spiff up the book a little bit, you fix a couple typos,
But looking down the road, this is actually going to be. I think this difference between the closed and the open resources gets more significant because in a world of text like this, the copyright rules kind of get exhausted. Basically, once I've bought this copy from a publisher, they have no legal rights to tell me what I can do with this. I can sell this to a used bookstore, I can mark it up, I can create and they're not going to see that. But now, with a digital version of this, you're buying the text and a license, and their license is full of restrictions. So when they put their digital bells and whistles on it, they put technological controls about it. So basically, your access to that book expires at the end of the semester, and you have to log in to be able to do this, that, and the other thing. And now I've forgotten the password, and I tried to log in 3 times, and I've lost access. So in a world of closed digital resources, closed in the copyright sense, you're getting other kinds of distortions, where if we create openly licensed stuff, the future is not going to be a book, it's going to be an algorithm that's going to pull in resources so that we're getting more individuated instruction, and we're going to do more sort of competency-based testing along. Did you actually understand chapter 1? Answer the following 5 questions. If not, go play this game, come back, answer my questions, now go to chapter 2. In chapter 2, we'll be pulling stuff from the fly. And if it's all openly licensed, the stuff that can be pulled, you don't have to negotiate.
The problem though is if there's not money being made on the publishing side, what's the incentive for that?
Right, so we got to come up with a financial model, and grants are one way. There are other models this isn't free. Nobody says open equals free. It's just that we have to come up. But yeah, that's a long answer to but yes, textbook prices and the inability to use the web in all of the ways that it might be used with closed resources are the two.
I just have to share an incredible irony about this, because in 1970 I moved to Brazil. I was right out of school, and I took a class at the university in southern Brazil, and the students, there were so few textbooks available in Brazil. This was it was being taught in English, that they were they were sharing books. And I remember thinking at that time, oh my God, this country, it's so backward, this is so awful. And here we are.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
It's the same story. Yeah.
Maybe their approach was better. It was a community sharing. and
No, it was really
resources.
tough for them because it really was tough. I mean, geographically, it was so hard, and I just remember thinking, someday I hope that, you know, they won't have to do that, because it's exactly what you described. That it's really a burden on the students who are already burdened, and they're just trying to learn. So it blew my mind when you started talking about this, that it's like a flashback.
Yeah, I think, you know, my own anecdotal experience is that the interest in open courseware is as strong, if not stronger, in other countries where you know the sort of GDP adjusted cost of the textbooks is higher. So you know, I think there's a lot more interest in open courseware in Latin America.
Also, some cultures are more open to sharing, having community-based
true. Yeah,
sharing
no,
of any resource.
I know,
Like the
and-
bartering culture and those kind of, even though they're modern urban cultures nowadays, but there's a history of sharing, not so much individualized consumerism. So whereas here, you know, from the 20th century all the way on, it's all into profit and individual consumption. So that becomes normal and acceptable for all of us here. But in some cultures, it's, oh, we have one thing we can share.
No, I know
200
that,
people
yeah.
can share one item.
I know the community sense is much stronger in a lot of places, but they were complaining. And I remember that's when I was, because they were pressured. I mean, they were trying to study for the tests, and
What's different is you have a
Too
limited
few
resource.
Maybe their education
That's
system tried to be like us, but then their resources were not compatible.
But there you have a limited resource. If it's open on the web,
Yeah.
then it's unlimited.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We're basically taking a model which is like a public good, right, where it's available to everybody, so you know, you make it non-excludable, you make it that everybody can consume it at once. But then at some level, still somebody's got to fund it.
Yeah, and there, in that graph I showed, or what else are they doing, that there's that other, I think that other underrepresents, they're infringing copies. People have put these things up on BitTorrent and
Coffee shops, photocopy shops
yeah,
everywhere.
but again, those are workarounds that are less, you know, I mean, often what's on BitTorrent are PDFs of the document. You can get a Word version of this, and the students can get a Word version of this. So think about how cool that would be if you're a student and you can get a Word version and you can insert your notes.
And search the document.
Right.
I mean, I think document search, bookmarking and metadata, you know, is really an amazing value for, you know, instead of handwriting your notes in the margin like we used to.
So just to clarify, when you wrote that book, if now you do use it for your class, and I'm your student, will I get a hard copy or a downloadable Word file? What will I get
Well,
when you
you
tell
can
me?
again, because I'm not so familiar with it, because we just had a discussion today, but as I understand it, you can get a downloadable copy for free, right? Or you can buy the actual printed version.
And so that's how the publisher might make a little money if I buy it, or I can download it and print sections I want or not.
Yeah, I think
Actually, the
this-
publisher will not make any money off the printed version. It's just print per copy. So it's basically as if you were to send a PDF to a printer yourself and have
Oh,
that
I
print and
see.
send it to you.
Well, they don't, they actually print, it's not, print on demand for a book like this is actually fairly expensive. So what they do is they do a print run and they'll sell you this for like $30.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, you can download it either for free in PDF or in Word. And they're really, they're making their money either because the foundations have paid them, and then they're making deals with some of the ancillary providers of assessment exercises and things, you know, those third-party providers who sell you quizzes and things like that, and using a platform like WebAssign, and they'll kick some money back to the publisher.
And that's one of the things as well that we made a little experiment with that to see how much, for example, Politics and Prose, the bookstore in DC, have one of those like print on demand little printers, and a 500-page PDF document costs you $25 to print, for example. So I want to make sure that the students can access it the way they would like to access it, right? So if you find a really good online resource, a real long PDF is a cumbersome format for 500 pages, even though we can search, etc. But for students who might want to print it, we want to make sure that we have that option available to them. And 25 obviously is a lot better than 250, for example. So I want to make sure that all those are there. Yeah, did you all sign up for this session when you registered? No? because I would like to take, for those who didn't, I'd like to just take your contact info in some fashion so I can email you with some follow-up information. But if you had registered, then you will get an email from me. Plus the others who registered, you will also get an email from me. So yeah, if there are any more questions? Well, perfect. Thank you so very much for coming. And, meeting you.